Glenda Raven is my name. I manage WWF's Environmental Leaders Program. Our objectives in the Environmental Leaders Program is essentially what the name reflects, is to develop capacity actually to deliver on the conservation mandates and objectives, not in WWF South Africa only, but across the sector. Just to start off with, on your program, you've got the question raised, do we have the future leaders to secure our ecological systems? So my question to you is, are we developing the leadership necessary to secure our socio-ecological future? And as a social scientist, I find every opportunity to bring the socials into the work that we do. I just want to do a bit of a recap on the interrelated nature of the challenges that we are confronted with in the work that we do, that requires equally interrelated responses. And the systems thinking for change, for me, is the most important part of what I believe we should be infusing in our leadership development models. I also then just wanted to share with you a case study of some of the work that we are doing in WWF around environmental leaders. And I know the warning was there that we don't market our programs, but trust me, I think that these case studies are worth bragging about. And I'm borrowing from Otto Scharmer, his 2009 writing, the phrase that we live in times of profound disruptions. And I sort of warm to the profound disruptions because I think that really reflects the kind of challenges that we are confronted with in the times that we live in. And those disruptions, I think, happens on the ecological front, and that is our preoccupation as an organization. But I think it's critical that we also recognize that there are disruptions happening in the economic sphere, then in the social sphere, and also in the political sphere. So within each of those spheres, there are quite complex disruptions that are happening, but I think the complexity increases when one actually recognizes that these disruptions are actually all connected. So whatever happens in the social sphere has impacts in the ecological sphere, which has impacts in the economic sphere and in the political sphere. So there's mass complexity, I reckon, in the work that we do. And very often, I suppose, for our own survival, we tend to want to go into our own little corner. But quite frankly, I think that makes us less effective in what we're doing. So the question that is uppermost in my mind in this space of connectedness and complexity, and very often competitiveness, and one sees it quite often where our conservation priorities compete with development priorities in our South African development context. How do we respond effectively? And how do we develop the capacity actually to respond effectively to this complexity in the challenges that we're confronted with? And there are some views that are offered, and systems thinking is one that is emerging more and more in terms of the perspectives that we need to adopt in order to effectively respond to our challenges. Our preoccupation is our biophysical assets, and we need to recognize that, I guess, in this room and elsewhere as well, we do recognize that those biophysical assets are the foundations on which we all exist. But we need to recognize that that foundation supports our economics, but that our economic systems are also embedded in our social systems, which are in turn embedded in our broader political systems. And so in each one of these, we've got massively a broad scope of interacting systems within each of them, and then across all of them. And I think that just sort of increases the scope of complexity that we're actually working with, the complex systems and interactions that we're confronted with. And in my view, what we need is innovative and creative responses, not that draws on the base of our social structure out of which the issues have emerged. We need to start to move towards defining a different way of being in the world and in relation to others. The systems thinking about this complexity and interactions across all of these multiple interacting systems, is that systems thinking really congruent with our socialization? And I'm not talking about our past socialization, but our ongoing socialization. To respond to that, I would say no, it isn't. As we go through our schooling system at a very early age, we are forced actually to make certain choices over other choices. So we choose a particular discipline, either natural science, social science, economic science, or agricultural sciences. Those are just as a couple of examples, and very rarely do those disciplines interact. And this is the context within which our leaders are developing. which I believe goes contrary to the kind of leadership that we actually need to respond to the complex challenges we have. As you move into postgraduate level, these silos start to tip towards each other. And out of that, we have a language that's starting to include things like multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary. And even though that is an intention at the higher education institutions, it still happens purely within the higher education context and sometimes not congruent with what happens in reality, really. Because we are training up our leaders in our higher education institutions with a particular way of thinking that doesn't actually match what it is that we need out there. And so just in terms of reframing our approach to leadership, this is again Otto Scharmer's work, which he talks about a broader scope of competence. Now, our universities are very good at developing technical competence and the foundations on which our work is built. Otto Scharmer talks about two additional types of competence. The second one he talks about is relational competence, and that's the extent to which we develop networks with others that sort of enable the kind of change orientation in the work that we do. And the third kind of competence is my all-time favorite, and that's the transformational competence. And that's the competence around self-identity and will to actually step out there and be different to the norm. And then he also looks at those three kinds of competences as happening in three different contexts. It can happen in the individual context, where you develop those competences just for yourself, or for an institution and effect the change in an institution, or otherwise at a broader systems level. And his argument is that most of our leadership development initiatives are focused at the level of technical competence for the individual, and some step out and start to enable the development of relational competence at an institutional level. But his argument is that we should be aiming for the transformational competence at the systems level if we want to effect any kind of real change. He talks about this approach as having the potential to ignite fields of inspired connection and action. And I just want to add for change, because change is really what we need. So that for me is a sort of new framing of how we ought to approach leadership development. And with that as a background, I just wanted to share with you a case study of leadership development in WWF. These are interns that joined WWF in March 2012. We take on approximately 7 of them every year. These are our current interns. They enter into our organization and our sector with a very strong foundational knowledge, but what they do lack is the translation of that foundations into the real work context. And we then place them with programs. The opportunity that we offer them is to come with that foundational knowledge and to build on those higher education foundations and strengthen their technical competence. But we try to go further in the program that we do run with them. We encourage them to participate in more than the programmatic work that they actually do and where they are placed with specific mentors. And these are just a couple of examples of some of the things that we've done with them. One other thing that we do with them is we run an induction program with them, quite an intensive induction program, and I run those myself, and sort of insist that they think beyond their programs and look at the work that they do in relation to the work of their fellow interns, but then also in relation to the sort of broader policy framework in South Africa. And that's not only the environmental policy framework, but also our socio-economic and development policy framework. This year, for the first time, we ran a team and leadership development activity with them, where we try to get them to reflect on their own thinking in relation to others and how they actually work in a team and in relation to others who have different backgrounds, different perspectives on the world. And another one of the activities was we encouraged them to, on Mandela Day, to organize an engagement for the WWF staff with one of the communities in the landscape initiatives that we work with. And they had a particular brief. They needed to engage with constituencies that we don't normally engage with. We needed to, of course, keep our environmental conservation mandate uppermost in mind, and whatever activity needed to be engaging. And they came up with the activity on their own. And I thought it was quite a significant outcome, but of course my view is always biased with regards to them. We've made a huge investment, and when it comes to February next year, we let them go. And my question is this enough? Is what we have given them, is that enough? And I can answer that question for myself, and it definitely isn't enough. I don't believe that leadership development can be a once-off event, as in a once-off cause, even if that cause is over a 5-year period. I think that it needs to be an approach, an ongoing approach, because of the complexity of the systems that we engage with. I think that we constantly need to be thinking about how do we develop and provide opportunities, not only for our young leaders, but even our current leaders and even our senior leaders to grow and to develop the kind of competences that makes us more effective in responding to the complexities that we sit with.